And so I hope you can understand that conferences like this don't just happen. Conferences like this put together with a lot of work and a lot of hours. The success of the society is largely, at the moment, due to two people that are quite close to me, two very supportive people and two mentors of mine. So please welcome onto the stage Dorothy Karlberg and Alan Sachs.
Just before we kick off, I'd like to introduce Dorothy. For some of you might know her as Dorothy McDermott. Dorothy Karlberg has been a cornerstone of the CCLSA for many years, and she's been involved in the contact lens industry for probably more years than she'd like to admit to, as have I. And there's probably two reasons we're standing up here today together, and that's Brien Holden. And we'll be going into that in a moment. Just two housekeeping notices. Those of you doing the two workshops, MGD up in the theatre as before, and biometry over the road. So before the end of the tea break, please head over there. And at the end of this session, please don't stand up and run out, because we've got a little surprise for everybody. So if we could roll the video, please. How we wish you were here, Brien. We have the slides, there we go. So, this ICCLC was created by Brien and Ken Bell together. Yeah. It's been a cornerstone of the society, and as we saw over this meeting, the people who come here, many of us have been influenced by Brien on the pathway. I'm standing here because of Brien. And many of you have achieved what you have in industry and in profession here and around the world, and countless millions of people have been helped through the endeavors of Brien. And so we wanted to recognize Brien's input, both from running the society with Ken and for the ICCLC. And you know, they have an Australia party at the American Academy that's basically set up because of Brien's infamous room parties after meetings. And I like to think there's a few people who made it to the lecture this morning who managed to do the room party last night, which we had in Brien's honour. That's why I'm a little bit raspy in the throat today. We did it, gave it a good bash, and at 3 o'clock we threw everybody out and said we better get back to bed, and we weren't able to run this show today. So those are the reasons we're here, and that's why we wanted to bring back an award, inaugural Brien Holden Memorial Award and Lecture, in recognition of Brien's contribution to society, and to bring back to Australia something that acknowledged Brien for what he's done, not something at an overseas conference, not something offshore or somewhere remote to us, because we are his people. And you know, he was a true character. He did this paper in Review of Optometry a while back about international ortho-K. And that's what Brien did his PhD in London, because Ian Bailey suggested he engage in research. And he said, given my relatively undistinguished undergraduate career, I failed the second year of my university optometry course fairly comprehensively, I thought that it seemed like an appropriately wild suggestion. And guess what the primary goal of his PhD was? Now this is mid-1960s in groovy, hippie Carnaby Street and Earl's Court in London. He said, my primary goal was to bend some bloody pommy corneas flat with hard lenses, and his contribution to payback for English colonialism. And that was Brien in a nutshell. I mean, the king. But we know Brien also, of course, because Professor Brien Holden, OAM, honorary doctorates from around the world. And a couple of years back, in fact, 7 years back at the American Academy Australia party, we've got a little video to play. Have we got sound? Is the sound not working on the HDMI? Do I need a sound cable then? Okay, sorry. I'll restart this, sorry. I thought HDMI would give us audio. Let's hope this works. Fiercely proud Australian, but he didn't just send his views here, it was a global view. He stood for the underdog. Brien wouldn't come to lecture to us racist bastards in South Africa until we changed them. It took us 20 years before we got him back there. So he really stood for good things and for, you know, the people of this earth. And that's, you know, myopia, the Brien Holden Vision Institute is a legacy. It's actively involved in myopia. They're training optometrists all around the world. And this article appeared in the very month that Brien passed away. It was delivered the year before at the American Academy, the famous Charles Prentice Award. And he talked about giants and collaborators. And Brien said how he stood on the shoulders of giants. But Brien, our larger-than-life guy, is our giant, and we've all stood on his shoulders. He collaborated with more than 360 people on research projects. There's one of the most famous ones, the most cited optometric physiology research paper in the world, and there's Brien along with his good old mate Des Fon, who came back to lecture me after his time at CCLSA. Tim was there in the early days, and our two inaugural awardees were also there, and there's George Mertz on the other end. So Dorothy?
Yeah, I'm just looking at these photos and stuff, and what was going on at the time, you know, before I moved in. As Alan said, Brien used to organise the whole event side of the conference, and that was fantastic, just for Ken to have that, and it certainly saved a lot of money, so it could be built up. I knew Brien from very early days. I think in about 73 or the late 72, I was working for Johnson & Johnson and trying to get, well, I hadn't even tried to get in because I didn't think I would get in, but Bausch & Lomb was setting up, and Brien and a wonderful guy, Lloyd Hewitt, both recommended me to Bausch & Lomb, and I got the job. So it was fantastic, but just having known him, I obviously impressed him, or he thought I had some intelligence or something, but that really kept me in the industry. And I worked with Brien over the years in a lot of projects. It was fantastic. I think when I moved overseas and to run the UK and then over to the US, would say to me, oh yeah, you know Brien Holden? And I'd say, yes I do, I'm the president of his fan club. So I thought, if you've got anything bad to say about him, don't say it to me. I had such high regard for him. Yeah, so yeah, in the very, very early days, he started doing a lot of the research, which I absolutely love. And in those days, he'd say, hey, can you drop me out a couple of boxes of wedding solution? And I said to him years later, gee, remember the wedding solution boxes? Now it's like thousands and thousands of dollars. But the comparison studies were fantastic, and that was the research that he started driving. I went to, when I was running the UK, I went up to Scotland to a conference, and Brien was the keynote speaker there, and I went out to the ladies at morning tea, and Brien had been talking and using some colourful vocabulary along the way, and I got into the bathrooms. The ladies are in the cubicles and they're going, God, did you hear him? Did you hear those words? I've never heard those words at a conference. So I came out and we were all washing our hands, and I said, you going back? And they go, God, we wouldn't miss it. So what he had to say on top of adding a swear word every now and again was really well and truly worthwhile. And as I said before, Ken was, he worked a lot with Ken. Ken ran what was then called the Cornea Lens Society of Australia. The Contact Lens Society of Australia. Ken worked there for 40 years as a volunteer. And Brien really, really loved Ken and really supported him, so that was fantastic. Just that one. These were the good old days out there. This is how he, the small sort of area that he had to work in. I went out one day to take him out to lunch, and he came out and he's got, I'm all done up in my business suit, and Brien comes out and he's got a t-shirt and a pair of shorts and rubber thongs on. He was a very sort of casual guy, working very, very hard in the in that unit. So they were fabulous days. Brien did promise me way back. I said, don't you retire before me, you bugger. And he said 2020. And now I think, oh, you let me down. But anyhow, so yeah. These are some of the parties and antics he got into, and I was happy to be along at many of them and saw how he performed. So fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks for those memories, Dorothy, because those go back a long way, and they really come from our hearts. So we're now going to bring up our two inaugural Cornean Contact Lens Society Brien Holden Memorial Lecture recipients, the legendary Lewis Williams and Steve Zantos. Now, we chose these two gentlemen, not even knowing that, as you'll see on this slide, that was part of Brien's Prentice Award lecture. These were Brien's first two PhD students. So Lewis and Steve, could you please come up? These are two fantastic gentlemen who were present with Brien. Take this down out of the way. Could we switch over to their presentation? They've loaded up at the back. There you go. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Society for this fantastic invitation to be part of this special tribute to Brien Holden. Quite possibly, in my view, he's the most influential optometrist around the world in the modern era. I can't think of anyone who's done more in more places around the world than Brien has done. His pride about promoting Australia was second to none, and thanks to him, the Contact Lens Society, contact lens practice in Australia have been on the world map for 30 or 40 years now. We always sort of thought ourselves as being on a different rung to the US and the UK, and Brien turned that around completely in a relatively short period of time. He was
This
a
guy,
great
Steve
inspirer
Zedos, the other
and
lecturer at the same time.
motivator and
I'm
a
the
recruiter.
He's Steve Zedos.
And
So you got
I'd like to, well,
he's
this
got a
is
small
Lewis's
one.
presentation. Do you have mine coming up ready to go? What I'd like to do is just take you through some glimpses of what life was like as a student under Brien Holden in the early 1970s when I was going through optometry school, and Brien had just arrived at the Department of Optometry at UNSW, as it was known back then. So it's really before the start of Brien's distinguished career. Just push this button and see what comes up next. No.
Do you have a USB of it?
It was loaded yesterday, yeah, it should be. The file presentation name starts with the letters B-A-H, Brien Anthony Holden. I've only got 5 or 10 minutes to go through some of these glimpses that I want to do, but I wanted to mention also that there's a number of good accounts of Brien's journey through optometry over the years from the 1970s, and that's fantastic. Thank you all. A paper by Charles McMonnies published some years ago traces Brien's career in a great anecdotal fashion. The paper that Alan referred to that was published just after Brien's death following his presentation at the American Academy meeting. It's great to read that in Brien's own words. It's just a terrific story to read. And my dear friend and colleague for today, Lewis Williams, has written a terrific tribute to Brien as well. So those 3 papers are available for anyone wanting to read and understand more about Brien's journey, which is a wonderful journey. I think it will be part of our optometric history in Australia for a long time to come. So Brien first arrived at the department in Sydney there in 1971. I first met him as in my second year of optometry, when he walked into the class to say, well, I'm your teacher for the anatomy and physiology of the eye. It's a subject I know nothing about, but I'm going to take you through it this year anyway. Well, he underplayed his knowledge. He actually knew quite a lot about it, but he grabbed our attention and made an immediate impact, and that was his style, as you know. So right away we knew this was a different lecturing style to what we'd been accustomed to, and it was just, we were naturally drawn to Brien as students. In those days there were 16 people in my class, so the class sizes were really quite small. So we knew he was approachable. He wanted to mix with students a lot. We had many sporting activities with him and a couple of other staff members who liked to jolly it up with the students. There he is in the top photo carrying the footy during a rugby game. He had his balaclava on as well for reasons I think to terrify us. And but he got involved in everything. He was a real mixer even with students, so there was no staff-student barrier with Brien. We spent many a time down at the wine bar and with parties at his house. And Yvonne, his patient wife, had the pleasure of cleaning up after all of those fine events. Well, Brien happened to arrive at pretty much the right time, because contact lenses, soft contact lenses, had just been introduced in Australia only a couple of years before he arrived. So in fact, it was 1969, exactly 50 years ago, that the first soft contact lenses reached Australia. And Brien was really enthusiastic about teaching us contact lenses. You could see he had the passion and the dedication to research as well. I don't know if you can see, but on the right there, that fitting guide, the Bi-Night Natural Lens, was I think the very first soft lens fitting guide ever produced in Australia. It's a great publication. It was actually about 50 pages long, so it shows you the amount of effort that the manufacturers, suppliers went to in those days to train optometrists with the new soft lens products that were coming out. So that was a big thing, and it was the perfect launching pad for Brian's career at the school. He had a huge number of interests in contact lenses. He just didn't, stick to one area. He loved the evaluating topography of the eye. That was the basis of his PhD work. He had a passion for optics of contact lenses on and off the eye, the physiology and pathology of contact lens wear, contact lens materials and designs, toric soft lenses, cleaning and disinfection, instrumentation for measuring contact lenses, and techniques for evaluating the ocular response to lens wear. So he was into everything, and he was able to get people excited for any of these projects, and he got everybody recruited in one way or another, whether you were an undergraduate, a postgraduate, a lecturer, a visiting optometrist. He somehow managed to draw people into him who just wanted to do work on research projects with him. And he had a couple of very early papers that he published then before his research got really underway. And even then he was laying the groundwork for many, many years ahead of future work. So he had a long-term vision of what he wanted to do and where he thought contact lenses should go. So my start on research was him as a third-year student. He just had me come into the lab and said, here, I've got a whole lot of soft lenses, get them dirty with mascara and this and that, and check how efficacious rubbing a contact lens is in getting stuff off. So that was my humble beginning to research, sitting there quietly rubbing soft lenses for hours on end and seeing what came off and what didn't. He did another amazing thing, I think, looking back on it now. He said, look, you're only in the third year, but there's a big contact lens meeting coming up. I think you should go and listen to the talks. And he was one of the speakers. And it was the very first international congress of this august group. It was 1972. It was in Sydney, just near where they have the Mardi Gras every year. And the great international speaker of the time was Professor Richard Hill from Ohio State University. And he was a big draw card, and everybody piled in, and we listened to the talk. So that just inspired me that as a student I could go to a congress before I was even an optometrist. It was truly fantastic, and it was all thanks to Brian. In fourth year, my final year, he got me involved in a research project which we all had to do, and that was scanning electron microscopy of contact lenses. And to add further inspiration to all, he said, look, this stuff's pretty good, you should publish the paper. So it finished up being published the next year and being my first publication with Brian and Penny Payne as one of co-authors. Brian got to be first author on that one though, because for some reason, when we sat down to discuss the authorship, we agreed that it should be done in alphabetical order. So my fate was sealed right at that point. I learned after that experience that the alphabet didn't come into play anymore. And at the end of my fourth year, Brian said, look, you've done a good job. Have you thought about enrolling in a PhD program? Which of course I never thought of, but Brian used his magic charms to get me going, and before I knew it, I was enrolled in a PhD program. And in those days, in the early 70s, there were lots of big questions about soft lenses and ocular response to lens wear, and you're probably not surprised by them, but it's all about oxygen and how much reaches the eye under a contact lens, and with the eyelids open and the eyelids closed, and the effects of different types of lenses and whatever. A lot of the main research papers were coming out of places like Berkeley with Robert Mandel, Ken Pulse and Irving Fatt. and Ohio State University with Richard Hill, and also the Victorian College of Optometry with Ian Bailey. And Brien, you know, placed a lot of value and interest in their papers, but he had doubts about the validity of some of the work, in particular to the amount of oxygen that some of these papers were claiming the cornea needed. So he felt like we needed to check all this out. And there were also lots of questions in clinical practice with soft lenses that just, you know, got Brien motivated to really check things out more thoroughly. So my first task, he said, you've got to build a better packometer, because it's all about measuring corneal thickness. That was the main tool available in those days to measure corneal edema, the response to lens wear. So he said, here's an old slit lamp from the 1950s. You can have that, and you build a packometer out of that. So that was fine, because these are the days when you had to build your own equipment. It's not like you just go and buy it and you're off and running doing research. So I managed, with the help of my dear colleagues shown below, Dave Russell, the wonderful Lewis, and inimitable Lewis Williams, Max Lang and Jack Alexander, to turn 50-year-old slit lamp into something that could measure corneal thickness very accurately. And it was largely due to Lewis's contribution, I have to say. He was the electronics expert that essentially created a digital optical instrument. So he digitized it so we could more accurately measure changes in corneal thickness. So Brien was happy with that, and we were off and running measuring corneal thicknesses as part of my PhD work. So, you know, Brien was just such a powerful motivator in getting people to do things, and even with rickety old equipment, we built something that was more accurate than anything else available at the time, and anything commercially available. The next big thing that got Brien really excited was the arrival of a brand new slit lamp in the optometry department. It had photographic attachments. This was, obviously it's no big deal nowadays, it was a big deal back then. And every now and again he would call his research students into the clinic room where that slit lamp was, and everybody wanted to use the newfangled slit lamp, so there was a bit of competition finding time on it. But he gathered us around the slit lamp one day, much like this famous Rembrandt painting of the anatomy lesson, the instructor and the pupils, and he said, I want to show you something. And he showed us this bright reflex that you see on the bottom left side of the screen there. And he started to increase the magnification, and all of a sudden we could see a little kind of mosaic pattern there, and as the magnification went up, it got even more visible. He said, that's the endothelium. This is a really important tissue. You know, you guys need to pay attention to that. So I was amazed. I mean, to look at the living eye, look at a layer of living cells in an undisturbed way like that, which no one had ever shown us before. We all learned about endothelium in class. We knew the theory about it, but we'd never really seen it. So to view it in vivo, undisturbed in that way, just made it was so majestic, and it made an impression on me that I still remember. So from that point on, I just looked at everybody's corneal endothelium. It was a fantastic experience to have had that learning opportunity with Brien. So for the next couple of years, I spent my time measuring corneal thickness, looking through the slit lamp, taking photographs, and seeing all sorts of adverse eye reactions to the continuous wear of contact lenses, because in those days there was a view that you could wear contact lenses, soft lenses, continuously and safely, and you know, all the reports seemed to say that. They didn't really talk much about adverse effects, and we were seeing all these adverse effects and wondering, what are we doing wrong? But it didn't matter. We were collecting all this information, GPC, red eyes, vertical striae, stromal infiltrates, epithelial microcysts, and lo and behold, the endothelial bleb phenomenon, which shocked everybody to the core. That got really Brien very excited. in the mid-70s. He was off on his sabbatical around the world for a year in 77, 78, and he was so excited about endothelial finding that he just kept writing letters back to me saying, Steve, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Can you, I don't think you can read it there, but in his inimitable and highly recognisable handwriting style with the black fine tip pen, he'd say, Steve, can you do some things for me, please? And there was a list of 2 or 3 pages of stuff that I had to find out for him and send it off to Ohio State or Berkeley or Moorfields, wherever he happened to be at the time. But that correspondence was just it's wonderful to reflect back on it, and it's a look inside Brian's mind in the 70s before things got really big and colossal for him. The endothelial bleb finding aroused a lot of attention around the world, and particularly at a big contact lens and intraocular lens meeting, would you believe? This Japanese company sponsored a joint IOL contact lens meeting in Nagoya in late 77. Brian was a speaker. He talked about endothelial blebs. Monty Rubin, who was there, said, look, history has been made today. We're so fortunate to hear it. Brian was chuffed by the whole thing and felt an even greater urgency to get this information into print. But at the same time, he, at that point in his career, he'd been looking for support from an ophthalmologist to help us understand better the adverse effects that we were seeing. But in Australia, there was just no one really willing to collaborate with us in the optometry school. But at that symposium in Nagoya, after his presentation where he made the big impact, he and I were in the bar at the end of the day just kind of going over the day's events, and sitting a few chairs away from us was a fellow on his own, and he kind of noticed us and he recognised Brian and came over and said, look, enjoyed your paper, really good stuff on endothelium that you spoke about. And from that moment on, a great friendship formed between Brian and that particular ophthalmologist, who was Antti Vanas, and many of you will know him, many of you will have worked with him, and he and Brian became, I think, pretty much soulmates and produced some fantastic research papers together over the ensuing years. So finally, Brian had found his ophthalmologist. And after that, a few more appeared on the scene. And his other big motivator and driver was to get published in this most prestigious journal of the time, Investigative Ophthalmology and Visual Science. We'd had a number of papers he and I rejected on this endothelial work. People just didn't believe it was a real phenomenon, that we were imagining it, that we were seeing shadows, and paper after paper kept being rejected. But eventually, Brian cracked investigative ophthalmology, and he was just so thrilled to have broken that ground as an optometrist, publishing what he considered to be the leading eye research journal in the world. And Brian had many other research pet projects of his own. He had everybody in the place working on stuff, but he had his own particular research projects. I won't dwell on them very long, but he got enthralled with measuring soft contact lenses. He made us all do it as students. We couldn't dispense a soft lens to a patient without first having measured all its parameters: power, thickness, diameter, radii of curvature. It was a big thing in those days to measure lenses. It's unbelievable in the day of disposable lenses now that you would do that, but he had us doing it, and it was fantastic stuff. But he would get in there and measure them himself. As postgrads, we were in the labs late at night working away on our research. Quite often he was there as well, behind this keratometer, measuring lenses in his beloved wet cell. He had a passion for toric soft lenses and became the world authority on that subject, the first expert in the 70s, and really got himself some recognition, first of all, through that area. Yeah, it was amazing. Then other things came in and he got interested in everything, as you know. So what does all of that mean? Well, that expression in itself is one of Brien's own sayings, as many of you will know. From my perspective, the 1970s was a fantastic period of great discovery about what contact lenses and soft lenses could do to the eye. I learnt all, I wanted to learn about research and teaching. Brien said, here, I'm away for 12 months, you run the contact lens course. What? So he didn't have any fear of delegating massive tasks to people, and that was a great strength of his, to get people working on things that people didn't think they could do. Helped me establish my network of international colleagues, got quite a lot of papers published together with Brien and others. But the best part of all of that was that for those several years I got to share all of those fantastic things with Brien. And he's just the greatest guy to have around for so many years. Before the CCLAU became a big, colossal thing, and the CR Cert and BH3I, it was sort of the days when you could spend a lot of time with Brien without him being hugely distracted. So for me, I'll always remember that as a really special part of my life, and something that has led to a great many wonderful things for me. So I hope you didn't mind that little journey through the reminiscing through the 1970s, one of my favourite decades. I mean, they're all good, but the 70s was particularly good in that way. So again, thank you to the Contact Lens Society and to others. I've got just one more slide to show of, I guess I can do that. Oops. There's a lot of people to be thanked along the way. In particular, I just want to thank Yvonne. Where are you, Yvonne? Okay. Brien's wife has been wonderful to me. So it wasn't really like a PhD supervisor, PhD student relationship. It was like a family relationship that I had with Brien and Yvonne and their kids, and I'll always be grateful to Yvonne for the many great things that she's done for me over that whole period. There's a huge number of people that you see there who are, many of them, pioneers of the contact lens world in Australia, and others who played a big role in my work at the university and getting that degree and heading off overseas for a job after that. So my thanks to them, and my thanks again to the Society. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is going to be fast and furious because we're running out of time. This is largely a photographic essay because basically if you have camera, you will photograph. As a preamble, basically Brien was a born leader and a stirrer, and that's evidenced by this spectacle, the student magazine, done up to look like the Australian Journal of Optometry, 1964, where he does a complete Paul Hogan type hatchet job on OPSM. 1971 was a special year. The Newton building that the School of Optometry, as Department of Optometry as it was at the time, was officially opened. Brien arrived. Soft contact lenses were becoming commercially available, probably mainly through Vic Lowe and G.K. Nissel in Melbourne. And I graduated in optometry, for which I give you Exhibit A and Dork 1. An all-male, this is Noel Verney's only ever all-male choir. And we had 9 people in final year. I believe one of them is probably dead because he had what I've never heard of, adult onset Fragile X syndrome, news to me. As my military career at the tail end of the Vietnam era, which was interesting because at a Vietnamese colleague's lecture in APOC in Manila, she refers to it as the American War, we refer to it as the Vietnam War. I'm not a Vietnam veteran, I have to add. As my military career was winding down, Steve's sporting career and research career was winding up. Also in that year, Choice magazine somehow or other got wind of soft contact lenses, and Brien featured twice in the article about soft contact lenses. But Steve only got into pan-metallic, the joke, University of New South Wales metallurgy team, definitely not pan-hellenic. The soccer career wasn't that great. In the beginning, 1973-75, I arrived in 74, Steve was in front of me. You can see a picture of Brien up the top there, a picture of me, and the guy with the side of the head there is Neil Murray from Adelaide. The top right picture here is actually Brien's first two PhD candidates. One is Steve, obviously, and the other one is Graham Fraunfelder, who practices in Albury still. Brien and Fraun were never going to get on, so Fraun dropped out after a while and did the M-Optom with me the year later. Brien was also pretty big on the sport. He had his own club, junior club that he was involved with. The bottom picture is 1974 as well. And in the middle picture, the other player there, adult player, main adult player, the tallest one, is in fact Richie Bell, who was an optometrist who was a member of the Australian soccer team. And Brien was dragging the right talent in, obviously. One of his first platforms was the BNL First Soft Contact Lens Symposium in 1978. If you look along the front row, you'll find quite a few luminaries there who are no longer with us. And I don't believe Brien's in the picture, which probably means he didn't hear the message to gather for the photograph. We also used to have fun. If you look up the top, the Toric Lens Company, all bullets keratopathy. Interestingly, my wife and I actually have the company Toric Proprietary Limited, so you can't take it, we've already got it. Brien's birthday bash surprise party in 50 years in 1992 was pretty good. If you look down the bottom, Brien didn't like dissension excessively, so Ken Pulse opened his mouth about something, so Brien Holden said, "Rap." The monkey down there is in fact Steve Zados. This was a poster that we doctored to represent Zeus, Steve Zados. And the picture of me here is actually the BNL oxygen apparatus that they sent us to use to measure oxygen performance. It was a nightmare. And we knew how to have fun. But unfortunately, when things got bigger and serious, money got involved, companies got involved, the stakes got higher, that all went out the window and it became much less fun. But of course, Brien always had his eye on the ball. Unfortunately, he had an eye on many balls. It was probably like the IKEA ball pit in the end. And once upon a time, Brien actually had time. If you look down the bottom, there's probably at the time somewhere between $250 and $500 worth of Brien's spare time. In his later years, that would have been $1 million or $2 million worth of his spare time because the stakes got so much higher. He had early interests. The very top left image is in fact a paper he made with Keith Masnick in 1972, so he'd only been in the department 1 year and he's already getting published. Neil Murray and I got involved in the middle set of slides looking at the physical properties of soft contact lens materials through textile technology. And down the bottom we had the world's biggest fenestration. We were trying to look at side effects of oxygen performance. And this actually puts a different spin on the whole idea of air optics, well before mivision got hold of the concept. And this one here is Paul John Senio, still practicing in Sydney. And we were looking at forces to remove contact lenses. We urethane bonded a string to the centre of a soft contact lens. And in the end, the eye would come out of the orbit about 10 millimetres before the lens would let go. It was quite amazing. Now, I've got 4 slides here about associating with the right people. You've got to associate with the right people. And fortunately for Brien, he made the fantastic choice with Yvonne, who's sitting down the back there. The old story about behind every great man, there is a great woman. If you want proof, this is it. Then he also got involved with a whole lot of other people. Brian Lale in particular, in his 1953 graduation photograph, he's now about 88, I think I figured. Artie Vanass, Charles McMonties, a very young Debbie Sweeney, Tony Phillips is kicking around, and of course George Burtz and Brien are not. Tyler Chan, Arthur Ho, Vagan, etc., etc. And the green guy in the middle there, believe it or not, is Don Martin. Down the bottom we have Baz, he had a special relationship with Baz, and of course Debbie, and we were still trying to have fun down at the bottom left. More right people, Donna. I don't know what went on up here. We had two famous researchers, and this one here, I'm not quite sure who the hell that is. Also, we have Auntie Vanessa in the middle there. Brian actually set up an ophthalmology fellowship, and the first one was Jukka Moilanen, also from Finland, and he and I got together and we tried to emulate my original photograph of Auntie as accurately as we could. The microscope is not exactly the same, but it's the later model of the same, and it looks almost the same. The pose is pretty close. Whoops, I went through there. Ken Bell and things you've seen. Dan O'Leary, who was one of Brien Holden's research subjects at City University. Jack Alexander was always helpful. The picture here with Steve, behind every bleb, it says styrofoam endothelium. It was created by Steve Payer and Arthur Ho. Behind every endothelium, he pulled it off, it was velcroed on. There was a picture of one of his colleagues from the Holden Empire at the time. And we sent that with Steve to B&L in Rochester, and I'm sure he still has it because it is such a classic thing. Were there some wrong people? Yes, Alan Sachs, absolutely the wrong person. The head of school, Joe Lederer, beautiful pen diagram there by Guts Grimshaw, definitely wrong. Steve Dane was a graduate student contemporary, so he knew Brien very well when he came to Australia, so he was a bit of a mixed bag. There was the Dragon Lady at the physics batch station, which was 07, and I also probably should have put Michel Guillaume there as being a mixed bag as well, because he came and worked with us for a while, but he and Brien then had a falling out and it didn't work out, which is unfortunate. Staff assets, core assets with staff, 84, 82 at the AVC conference, and various other ones from 90s, 2000, the early 2000s. And of course, as we went along, the staff size grew, and all the consultants down the bottom read like a who's who. It's a typical Brien Holden document, I've got to say. Prophetic pictures. Yvette, up on the left there, is actually now Brien's replacement, which would have surprised a lot of people in about 1987 or so, and 2013 or 14. Locations, we've had a few. We were in the Newton building, which you can still see exists, but is now sort of gazumped by the monstrosity next door. On the left in the middle is the Randwick Tramway Workshops. The CCLIU spent several years in this building, which is the brass foundry and the underground service unit, and a lot of time in this building, which was the overhead wires and rubber tyre store for trolley buses. And then we, of course, moved to the RMB, which are the bottom two photographs, which is where they are currently still installed. Significant papers. Steve's already covered most of these. Of course, there were numerous significant papers, and also the publication of the Holden Xantos technique. Organisations, almost too numerous to remember. I think he had a random letter generator and looked at combinations. I want random combinations of 3. I want random combinations of 4. I want random combinations of 5. And on it went. In 2005, on the 12th of October 2005, he was honoured by addressing the National Press Club, which is a pretty prestigious event. When they finished the address, he actually got up, everybody left, and all these place name tags were left behind. So I snavelled Barry Jones, because he's one of the few Australian living legends. He's now 87 years old. Anybody's old enough to remember his performance where he used to tackle Encyclopedia Britannica and win will be a great fan of his. So he was on the same table. I wasn't. I was with the peasants down the back somewhere. But he was at that meeting, and I think that was pretty good. We had lots of computing power. We started out with a large, heavy desktop programmable calculator. I am pleased to say that the keyboard on it, which is a fantastic piece of work, still exists because I took it. And we had pocketable computers, big computers. We had electronic charts 20 or 30 years before they became available regularly. The bottom computer which is actually a scientific calculator, was a EL 5100. Everybody at the Holden Empire had an EL 5100 because it did science and statistics. Statistics being the important thing. And in the early days when he wasn't so administratively heavy, Brien could actually do it. You've seen the one him operating the keratometer. You can see him actually colouring in slides. You can see him actually using a slit lamp, and he seems to be using it properly, so he must have known something about it. And he used a computer, which of course he was single-handedly driving the acquisition of. There were plenty of people in the department who wanted one, but he drove the acquisition. Through the ages, of course, his appearance changed considerably. And if you look at the top left-hand photograph, which was released as a series for his 60th birthday, and if you know his son Daniel, you can tell that definitely he was involved in fathering that child because they had a dead ringer. The only mystery that I could have come up with, if I came to you and said, I have this fantastic contact lens material, which I believe it was, but it has a high specific gravity and a low refractive index, what would you say? Well, for some reason, they actually said, yeah, we'll have a look at it. For those of you into the Bible, you may recognise some of this. This was a calendar for a Texas Instrument. With Brien, more things were possible. I think the quote is something like, it's easier for the camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy man to pass into the kingdom of heaven, or words to that effect. I'm not a Bible pusher. But with Brien, things were possible. By any measure, he made it. He appears everywhere. Even in the late Tim Bowden's book, the late Charles Wright's book, in Barry Cole's book, papers. In the bottom left-hand image, it's going to be about 7 years ago now, I've forgotten exactly, he was given the James Cook Medal and Fellowship of the Royal Society of New South Wales. And that's his good friend Paul Erickson. And of course, when it comes to medals, he could start up a numismatic business. The perpetual trophy which I've created with help from Steve Zanos, Yvonne, and Alan, tries to address a lot of things. He didn't invent yellow filters, but he was the biggest promoter of yellow filters. The photograph of the instrument is actually this tube here. This is the real photograph for the Holden Santos technique. He gave the address. This beautiful thing here, when you've got that sharp desktop calculator, it's a magnetic card, business card size, and you can read his scrawl on it. It's very characteristic. It says Holden, back vertex power calc with fixed BCOR1, BCOR2, which is BOZR, BOZR2 in ISO, and T and N. And there's a printout inside as well. His National Press Club, and we had a 20th anniversary to coincide with this meeting in 1996, celebrating 20 years, and that's was the MC's badge. What I want for this trophy, I'm missing an oxygen probe. So if anybody's got a radiometer, E5047 oxygen probe in presentable condition, I would love to have it to add to this. It's the only thing missing. And here is Brien in 1978 at his commanding best. And I think we should leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lewis and Steve. Those were brilliant memories. And please, everybody, come take a look at this trophy that Lewis hand-built and created over the past months in response to this award. It's something to really appreciate. Dorothy is going to take over now. Before we hand out the awards.
Well, I did the lucky task of asking Yvonne Holden up here today. When you say talk about great men, I'll tell you, I've known Yvonne for as long as I knew Brien, and that's close to 50 years. And she certainly was very, very involved in what Brien did. She loved it. We all had parties there, but she did a lot of the work as well. Brien depended on her. She's honest, and she was great for Brien, getting his work out and getting all the stuff he did. So I have the great honour of introducing her. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, and we're so lucky to have her here. Thank you.
I still have to change to reading glasses in front of all of you people. It's a bad deal. I thought I was going to cry through all of that, but I can't stop laughing. I mean, it was really good. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Lewis. It's fantastic. Now, what I was going to say, I prepared in the real school teacher way with bits and pieces everywhere, has actually been said, so bear with me when I repeat myself. First of all, I'd like to thank the Cornea Contact Lens Society, and especially Alan, for creating the Brien Holden Memorial Award. Here we go. Our family are really grateful for this. I can't tell you how grateful, and I'm proud to present this award, and I'm sure Brien would be smiling to himself knowing that I'm up here on the podium instead of him. Who would have thought, huh? Even back in 1971, when Brien first started work at University of New South Wales, the Contact Lens Society, led by Ken Bell, was a force. As it is today, it was a forum for sharing, discussion, debating and celebrating current contact lens research, education and practice. And Brien always loved to be part of it. It was his little pet thing for so long. I do wish he was here today, just as the song. Contact lens research was always an adventure for Brien. It was never work. He couldn't wait to get up in the morning and go, and he'd work at home at night till 3 in the morning. You know, he lived it, totally lived it. He loved the challenges, and he loved questions, and he loved solving the problems. And as we know, he did it well. But his research career was all about collaboration and friendships. And you know, the boys have touched on many of the friendships. There were so many more. And he relied on friendships, and he relied on collaboration. He never worked alone, and that's why it's so appropriate today that we honour his first postgraduate students and collaborators and friends in Steve and Lewis. Steve and Lewis were trailblazers, part of that hard-working group that was known for rigorous research right back in the early 70s. And they were acclaimed worldwide very soon. And they were central to the establishment of the CCLAU, which is currently called, as we all know, the Brien Holden Vision Institute. Steve was serious, insightful and thorough. Lewis, extremely knowledgeable, but a bit crazy, as we know. And we always knew this. And they helped lay the groundwork for this vibrant culture of inquiry that is still there today. And it attracted optometrists and especially ophthalmologists, which was Brien was very proud of, from around the world. And they enriched the field of contact lenses research here in Australia. When Brien died 4 years ago, many spoke of his legacy, and people tried to console me, well, he has a legacy. And, you know, it was a bit hard to sort of work this out at the time. And we can quantify many aspects, you know, the number of children that have been examined in developing countries, the number of optometrists and assistants who have been trained in developing countries, the number of collaborations, of clinical trials, of products, of patents, the number of postgraduates who have completed their courses. We can count the royalties earned from safe, innovative lens design. It's a bit hard to quantify, you know, vision, dedication, and those silent things that are his legacy. What I have come to realise, and I do understand now, that his legacy is far more than that, far more than that list of things, which I realise I should have up with points, but I'm not into that. This legacy is the people whose career he has affected, the people he has influenced, the people he has inspired, and the people who inspired him, And I include Steve and Lewis as people who inspired Brien. He'd come home and he'd say, guess what they did? This is what they did. And he was inspired, it motivated him more. And these people pass on and share enthusiasm, experience, and integrity to the next generation. That's his legacy. Steve and Lewis here today are a pioneering and integral part of this treasured legacy. And today I am so happy to congratulate them as the first recipients of the Brien Holden Memorial Award.
This fantastic trophy that's been created many months of hard work and nearly caused a divorce, I'm told, will be on display in perpetuity at the Brien Holden Vision Institute in a special corner that's dedicated to Brien with his trophy. So we will make sure that gets to the right place. And if you two gentlemen propose with that, anyone? Thank you so much, Yvonne and Steve and Lewis and Dorothy, and thank you all. I know we're running a bit late, but that was something very special to all of us. So thank you, and we'll move on to tea and carry on with the program. Thank you.